Greetings, Father Mark, signing on, continuing the course on medieval church history with the second installment in our unit on the Carolingians. Last time we met the two sons of Charles Martel, by name Charlemagne and Pepin the Shorthair. And we stopped there. So now we pick up with him. Charles Martel's eldest son, by his wife Rotrude, was named Carloman. Carloman. When Charles Martel died on October 22nd, 741, he did it again. So in the section of the Merovingians, we covered it. It wasn't just them, it was Salian law. It was Salian, the Salian Franks, it's just what they did. They always divided everything among their sons. And the Merovingians, again and again, they did that, So this guy will spend his whole life uniting all the pieces of the realm back under his control, and then when he dies, it just divided among his sons. And Charles, despite all the history we covered with the Merovingians, which he knew, and what we had time to cover is just a tiny sliver of the carousel of carnage that was Merovingian history. Yet Charles Martel, who spent his whole life fighting, killing, intriguing, to not only reassemble all the pieces of the Regnum Francorum, but to expand them, with his conquest in Phrygia, Alemannia, Hessia, and Swabia, and Bavaria. And yet, in his will, he just did it again. Just divide it. It's because this time it'll work. This time it'll work. The previous 93 times it ended in a horrific everyone drowning in blood. But this time it'll work. Okay, so anyway, he did it. But he still, even when he died, he was not claiming to be king. So what he's dividing is the role of mayor of the palace, not the title of king. So they're still going to serve these titular figurehead Merovingian kings. Carloman, as the eldest, got the heartland, the original Frankish kingdom where Clovis came from. So he became mayor of the palace for the kingdom of Austrasia. That's the Osterreich, the eastern Frankish realm, which included Belgium and part of northern France, and now east into Germany, into West Germany, but across the Rhine, to Fulda, which we covered last time. Pepin the Shorthair, the younger, became mayor of the palace for the kingdom of Neustria, the Western Reich, roughly, corresponding to northern France and western France. The brothers initially cooperated to crush a separatist uprising in the south, in Aquitaine, in 742, seeking to regain autonomy for the Aquitaine after Martel's death. Remember, Charles Martel, the Aquitaine, it had been invaded by Islam, and the Muslims beat them pretty badly. And so then Duke Odo of Aquitaine had to turn to Charles Martel for help to be rescued from the Muslims. Martel did. That's what led to the Battle of Tours in 732. But there's a price. Charles, Martel was not his family name. Martel was his nickname. It means the hammer. So, that there's going to be a price. He's not going to help without a price. And the price was that Aquitaine had to agree to subordinate itself to the Regnum Francorum. the kingdom of the Franks. So Martel's gone. Now Aquitaine, southern France, southwestern France, so Bordeaux is the main city, that sees the opportunity to try to separate and achieve autonomy again. So the brothers, Carloman and Pepin, cooperated in crushing this separatist uprising. For the next 7 years, the brothers continued the Merovingian practice of exercising executive and military authority as mayors of the palace, but in the two separate sub-kingdoms, doing it for figurehead monarchs, figurehead Merovingians, even naming their own. In the year 743, they named Childeric III, and pretending that he was the Rex Francorum, that he was the king of all the Frankish realms. In the same period, 742 and 43, they joined forces to slaughter Saxons, who had the same idea of gaining territory from the Regnum Francorum after the feared Hammer was dead. And the Saxons learned to their sorrow that that the sons were just as ruthless. The next year, 744, Odilo, the Duke of Bavaria in southern Germany, made the same attempt, faced the same result, defeat. Though afterwards the brothers sealed an alliance with him by giving their sister Hiltrude in marriage to the Duke. Now that's an offer they did not extend to Aquitaine or to the Saxons. And, well, I'll eventually explain why Bavaria was different in this regard. Many of the subsequent ecclesiastical accomplishments of St. Boniface, took place in the territories allocated to Carloman, the kingdom of Austrasia, and its annexed conquest. As it happened, Carloman, and Pepin for that matter, were genuinely religious. The Hammer, their father, sent them to be educated at the Abbey of Saint-Denis, which we covered, mentioned in this section of the Merovingians. So these guys were educated, unlike Martel, who was not, but he did value learning. So the two kids were genuinely religious. I mean, they were still ruthless. I mean, this is the 8th century, so. But they were genuinely religious. And they continued their father's policy of protecting and supporting St. Boniface in particular, and the church's mission in general. We already read excerpts of Martel's correspondence on the matter in the Merovingian unit, so I won't repeat that. In 742, for example, Carloman supported St. Boniface in summoning the Concilium Germanicum, the German council in Germany, which opened on the 21st of April of that year, probably in the city of Metz, because that was the capital of Austrasia. The objective of this council was to provide canonical structure for the growing church in Germany. As we saw, that Boniface established both dioceses as well as abbeys, so it was growing. And to codify the legal relationship between church and state in the newly absorbed lands. Essentially doing for Germany what the Council of Orleans did for France during the reign of Clovis, which we covered in the Merovingian unit, which amounted to a treaty between church and state, regulating how they would relate to each other, what rights and privileges, obligations they each had in the realm. So the Council of Orleans did that for France, and now the Concilium Germanicum, the Council of Germany, is going to do that for the new, not for all of Germany yet, because it hasn't The Carolingians haven't conquered it all yet, but it did establish the canonical foundation upon which the medieval German church would be constructed. Now we're fortunate, again, to have some of the relevant background correspondence, specifically a letter from Boniface to the Pope at the time. This is now Pope 91, Pope St. Zacharias or St. Zachary. And we have a reply from the Pope, the substance of which guided the formulation of the canons of the Concilium Germanicum. So in Boniface's collection of letters, this is letter number 27 to Pope Zacharias. Quote, "To our beloved Lord Zacharias, who bears the insignia of the Supreme Pontificate, Boniface, a servant of the servants of God. We confess, Father and Lord, that after we had learned through messengers that your predecessor Gregory, of holy memory, had departed this life, nothing gave us greater comfort and happiness than the knowledge that God had appointed your holiness to enforce the canonical decrees and govern the apostolic see. Kneeling at your feet, we earnestly beg that as we have devoted servants and humble disciples, we have been devoted servants and humble disciples to your predecessors in the See of Peter, we may likewise be counted obedient servants under canon law of your holiness. It is our firm resolution to preserve the Catholic faith and the unity of the Church of Rome, and I shall continue to urge as many hearers and disciples of God shall grant me on this mission to render obedience to the apostolic see. Be it known to you also, Holy Father, that Carloman, Emperor of the Franks, he's calling him Emperor of the Franks, and that's not correct. But I think Boniface, they studied Latin, so they would have encountered the word imperium. So in the original Roman usage, imperium referred to an authority to command in the field. It's a military term, and it would be sort of indexed based on a person's rank. So quaestor had an imperium, an aedile had an imperium, a praetor, a consul. But that's during the Republic. So they each had more and more authority in the field. Could they command a century, a cohort, a maniple, a legion, multiple legions? But then after the Republic was replaced by the Empire, they retained that idea, and then the term imperium still existed, and it was still indexed. But the imperator is the one who had the supreme military authority. So the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, so to speak, that was the imperator. But he's using it, but it's not precisely correct, because it would not be Carloman, but it would be Charlemagne, who was Carloman's nephew, that would revive the title of emperor and become the first Holy Roman Emperor in the revived Western Empire in the year 800. But this is the letter. So be it known to you also, Holy Father, that Carloman, Emperor of the Franks, summoned me to his presence and desired me to convoke a synod in that part of the Frankish kingdom which is under his jurisdiction. He promised me that he would reform and reestablish ecclesiastical discipline, which for the past 60 or 70 years has been completely disregarded and despised. If he is truly willing, under divine inspiration, to put his plan into execution, I should like to have the advice and the instructions of the Apostolic See. According to their elders, the Franks have not held a council for more than 80 years. They have had no archbishop, nor have they established or restored in any place the canon law of the Church. The episcopal sees, which are in the cities, have been given for the most part into the possession of avaricious laymen. So this is the feudalism problem, you see, or exploited by adulterous and unworthy clerics for worldly uses. If I am to undertake this task at your bidding, and on the invitation of the emperor, I must have at once, with the appropriate ecclesiastical sanctions, both the command and the decision of the Apostolic See. Should I discover among these men certain deacons, as they are called, who have spent their lives since childhood in debauchery, adultery, and every kind of uncleanness, who have received the diaconate with this reputation, and who even now, when they have 4 or 5 or even more concubines, are brazen enough to call themselves deacons and read out the gospel, who enter the priesthood, continue in the same career of vice, and declare that they have the right to exercise the priestly functions of making intercession for the people and offering Mass, and who, to make matters worse, are promoted, despite their reputations, to higher offices and are eventually nominated and consecrated bishops. May I, in such cases, have a written and authoritative statement regarding the procedure to be followed, so that they may be convicted as criminals and condemned by apostolic authority. So this is huge. He wants the Pope to agree. Well, first he's letting the Pope know, but of course he already did, but just put it in writing, the feudalism problem and how it was specifically manifesting in the Regnum Francorum, in the Kingdom of the Franks. In part because of Carloman, who was the mayor of the palace. Carloman's father, the Hammer, Charles Martel, after, in all of his conquest, in a money-poor economy, land was the way you rewarded your followers. So he's given these people, land. And some of them, because of the problem we already discussed, the feudalism problem, there were advantages to these families, the Adligen, the aristocratic families, to endow the church, because then the land would be exempt for taxation. And then they could send their younger sons or daughters into the church to become abbots, bishops, if they're sons, or abbesses, prioresses, if they're girls, but still use those fiefs for the benefit of the family, yet achieve the tax exemption. And so you have it. So that some of they're sending these people into the church without a vocations, and you see the result. They have concubines, they're drunks, they debauchery. They did not elect for themselves the ecclesiastical life, so they felt no obligation to adhere to it. And this is what happens. And Boniface wants to remove them. He wants the Pope's authority to remove these people, and if necessary, convicted as criminals and condemned by apostolic authority. Okay, continuing with the quote. Among them are bishops who deny the charges of fornication and adultery, but who nevertheless are shiftless drunkards, addicted to the chase, who march armed into battle and shed with their own hands the blood of Christians and heathens alike. And this is, like Charles Martel as warriors. You just, okay, I'll reward you. And this tells us some of these guys, they would not necessarily bother sending a younger son into the church. They just, well, okay, I'll become the bishop and collect all the revenue from the diocese. But I'm still going to be a warrior in the comitatus of the, of the mayor of the palace, so I can get more. And here's the result. Okay. Now, more specifically with Germany and the conquered territories. Because the sensual and ignorant Alemannians, Bavarians, and Franks see that some of these abuses, which we condemn, are rife in Rome, they think that the priests there allow them, and on that account they reproach us. They say that in Rome, near the Church of St. Peter, they have seen throngs of people parading the streets at the beginning of January each year, shouting and singing songs in pagan fashion, loading tables with food and drink from morning till night, and that during that time no man is willing to lend his neighbor fire or tools or anything useful from his own house. They recount also that they have seen women wearing pagan amulets and bracelets on their arms and legs and offering Okay, I'll skip that part. Skip that too. All such abuses witnessed by sensual and ignorant people bring reproach upon us here and frustrate our work of preaching and teaching. Okay, what's this about? Pagan practices in Rome. That doesn't sound right. Well, this is the Lombards, or the Langobards, as they were called, and later that was euphemised to the Lombards. We met them in an earlier session, and we're going to meet them again in this Carolingian unit. They were Scandinavian originally, came in to the empire as Foederati, betrayed, of course, as all the Foederati did, betrayed the empire, in their case, the Byzantines, the Eastern Empire, and moved into Italy and set up a kingdom for themselves, as we'll see, the Rex Langobardum, the kingdom of the Lombards. Well, they were barbarians. They were thugs, and so many were pagans. Some were baptized Christians, but functionally heretics. Others were just pagan and never bothered converting. So they would go to Rome, and because they were in northern Italy, there's nothing the Pope could do to stop them. So if they're visiting Rome, or if they just want to live in Rome, they're pagan. So of course pagans are going to live like pagans. And so Franks who went to visit Rome and they saw that, or Germans who were even closer, saw that and then return home and they hear Boniface denouncing paganism. They say, well, here, your Pope, the guy he's like, your king, the Pope is your king, and he allows this in his city. So what's wrong with it? That's what Boniface means. So continuing the quote. If your holiness would put an end to these heathen customs in Rome, it would redound to your credit, besides promoting the success of our teaching of the faith. Frankish bishops and priests, whose reputation as adulterers and fornicators was notorious, whose children, born during their episcopate or priesthood, are living witnesses to their guilt, now declare, on their return from Rome, that the Roman pontiff has granted them full permission to exercise their office in the church. Our answer to them is that we have never heard of the Apostolic See giving judgment contrary to the canonical decrees. All these matters, beloved Master, we bring to you in order that we may give these men an authoritative, show these men an authoritative way under your guidance and instruction, overcome these ravening wolves, and prevent the sheep from being led astray. Okay, he sent this to Pope Zacharias, who was the new pope at the time, and Pope Zacharias wrote back. This is letter number 28 in Boniface's collection, dated April of 743. Zacharias, servant of the servants of God, to his very reverend and holy brother and fellow bishop, Boniface. When we received your letter, most holy brother, which was brought to us by your priest, Denehard, and heard that you were in good health, as we hope you may always be, we gave thanks to Almighty God, who has deigned to crown your labors with success. Our heart is always filled with great joy on the receipt of your letters, because we find in them reports about the salvation of souls and the conversion of new peoples through your preaching to our Holy Mother, the Church. You tell us that our son Carloman summoned you to meet him and to arrange for a synod to be held in that part of the Frankish kingdom which is under his rule, because of the complete collapse of church discipline in that province, a matter which we deeply regret. For a long time, no council has been held there, and as a result, many who call themselves priests hardly know what priesthood is. Feudalism problem. When Carloman has put his promises into effect, and you take your place by his side at this council, if you see bishops, priests, or deacons living in adultery, or having more than one wife, in flagrant contradiction to the decrees and laws of the fathers, or shedding the blood of Christians and pagans, or acting in any other way contrary to ecclesiastical law, you must suspend them on apostolic authority from their priestly duties. For such individuals stand condemned by their own conduct as false priests, and are worse than these layfolk who give rein to their lust, foster infamous unions, and commit murder. Okay, comment there when he mentions more than one wife. So at this celibacy, at this point in church history, the 8th century, was only mandatory for monks and nuns. And for the monks, whether they were ordained priests or not, as we saw, we talked about St. Benedict, most monks, there's nothing intrinsic to the monastic vocation that requires ordination. The house has to have at least one priest to say, do the sacraments, but the monastic vocation is a separate, a distinct vocation. There are, anyway, so celibacy was only mandated for them, but for everyone else, it's back to, what St. Paul's in his letter when he's advising Timothy and Titus who to pick to ordain. He said, you choose those who are married only once. And so from that, the Council of Nicaea, the First Council of Nicaea, 325, stipulated that a married man could be ordained, but an ordained man could not get married. So, a guy who's already married could be ordained a priest, but if his wife died, he could not remarry. Or if an unmarried man was ordained, then he could not marry. So that's why he's pointing, he said more than one wife, Now, of course, he's talking about more than one at a time, and not really why. Of course, pagans, they practice polygamy, so for them it was not scandalous to pagans to see one of their lords, living polygamously, because that's, that was common for them. But of course, it's contrary to church law. Okay. Okay. On what grounds? Oh, and about the murder. This is going back to the, like Martel was rewarding his warriors with this. So even these guys who accepted ordination for the sake of getting the fiefs, they still were warriors. They still carried around their swords and spears, still get on the horse and go kill people in battle to get spoils of war. So that's what he's talking about, committing murder. Continuing the quote, on what grounds do they consider themselves to be priests? And how do they interpret God's word? Let my priest marry once. Or, the words of the apostle, faithful to one wife. And this is valid only before receiving the priesthood, for afterwards they are forbidden to marry. How do they think they can perform priestly duties when they are obviously steeped in such crimes as are unthinkable even in laymen? I think, the good Pope, these crimes were not unthinkable in the 8th century, but you know what he means. They should be unthinkable. How can they have the effrontery to offer prayers for the sins of the people when the sacred canons prescribe that not even a simple cleric who has not been ordained may contract a second marriage? These men, on the contrary, are guilty of sins worse than those of laymen, not only because, being priest, they refuse to give up one wife, but because they take several wives, when they know quite well that their state precludes even the taking of one. Now, I don't know, maybe some of these guys may not have known that very well, because, these are not theologically minded people. The kind of people in the Comitatus of Charles the Hammer, Martel, theology was not a priority for those guys. But anyway, but they attach no importance to this and proceed to call down on themselves the wrath of God by committing the still greater crime of murder. And so it comes about that those who should baptize and cleanse from their sins, and whom they should save from hell, the administration of the sacraments, are slain by their sacrilegious hands. How can any reasonable man regard them as priests if they neither restrain their lust nor keep their hands free from blood? Who can believe that their sacrifices are pleasing to God when the prophet says, bloodthirsty and treacherous men the Lord holds in abhorrence? As I have said previously, we command you to suspend them from the performance of priestly duties and the handling of the sacred mysteries. That's the sacraments. If you find that they have acted contrary to the laws of the Church in any other matters, consult the canons and decrees of the Fathers and make your decisions accordingly. The Holy See never countenances anything in open violation of the teachings of the Fathers and the laws of the Church. Continue to warn, exhort, and urge them to break off so detestable a marriage, lest they perish eternally. Recall to their minds that they have been redeemed by the blood of Christ, and that they must not wittingly hand themselves over to the power of the devil in this incestuous marriage. Let them dedicate themselves to Christ and to the Holy Ghost, in whose name they have been snatched from the claws of that ancient foe. Impress upon them, most holy brother, the words of Scripture. To bring back erring feet into the right path means saving a soul from death, means throwing a veil over a multitude of sins. Now, the thing about incest, in this, among some of these barbarian tribes, one of the forms of polygamy they practiced was sororal polygyny. So polygyny means one man marrying multiple women. Sororal polygyny means one man marrying sisters. So like if the guy, if he married, had one wife, and that's an alliance, a family alliance, or even a tribal alliance, depending on how important they were. And that's a big deal, because if you ally yourself with another family or tribe, that tribe does something stupid, then you're on the hook. You have to stand by them. So it was a big deal. And so it could be that either a younger daughter, a younger sister of a wife, if the family could not afford to give her a dowry, or maybe if the older sister could not have children, or if her children died and then she, got past the point where she could have more, then they would just marry the younger sister. So that's what it means by incest, sororal polygyny. And they were not the only society to practice it, but of course, still it's incest in the eyes of the Church, as well as being polygamous. Because these evils were cropping up again and again, we strove... Oh, no, I skipped that. As regards the New Year's celebrations, auguries, amulets, incantations, and other practices, which you say are observed in pagan fashion at the Church of St. Peter the Apostle or in the city of Rome, we consider them to be sinful and to be pernicious, not only for us, but for all Christians, according to God's word in the Scripture. We consider also that auguries and divinations should be avoided. Because these evils were cropping up again, we strove to abolish them from the very outset of our pontificate, when, by divine favor, we were elected to fill the place of the apostle. We desire you to instruct your people on the same lines and so lead them to eternal life. All such practices were conscientiously and thoroughly suppressed by our predecessors, which, on the instigation of the devil, were beginning to make their appearance in the fold of Christ. We have sent letters also to our son Carlemagne, urging him to carry out his promises at the earliest possible opportunity and to give you his support. These, beloved brethren, are our answers to the inquiries you made previously, given as God has inspired us for the suppression of all the scandals and the deceits of the devil. If other disorders arise among your people, do your best to counteract them, framing your decisions on the laws of the Church. Be assured that you have a special place in our affections. May blessed Peter, okay, may God keep you safe, most revered Holy Father. Okay, it's dated April the 24th in the year, whatever I said earlier, 743. Yeah, April 24th, 743. All right, so with that, Boniface, Carloman kept his word, and they had the Concilium Germanicum, and the result of which was, not quote, I'm not going to read all of it, just a summary. First, that as soon as feasible, dioceses and monasteries, convents, given by Charles Martel to his warriors in reward for their loyalty, would be restored to ecclesiastical order with ordained bishops or abbots, abbesses, depending on what, but whatever the proper ecclesiastical superior was. Now, as soon as feasible, because that this took years to accomplish, and in some cases it never was accomplished. These are killers. These are all trained killers, well-armed, trained killers. And the Hammer, Charles Martel, who was revered as a great warrior, gave him this as a reward for their loyalty. He gave him this land. So who's going to take it away from him? Certainly not a churchman like Boniface, who truly followed the canons, which means he had to be unarmed. So he's not. And if Carloman had tried to use his own troops to do it, to take the land back, it would have triggered a civil war. And then he probably would have been deserted by his own troops, because they're thinking, okay, how are you going to reward us? In a money-poor economy, they did still coin money, but there was never enough. So land was the way, that you rewarded people. And they did. Land was available because of the conditions of life in the 8th century. The population was very low. People didn't survive long in the 8th century. And with all the wars and the diseases, there was land available. So that's just how they did things. All right, second. Bishops must visit their parishes, and clergy must appear annually before their bishop for a review of their activities. And these could be done simultaneously. So if the bishop visits the parish, then obviously he's going to talk to the clergy there. Third, all parishes were to use only sacred chrism, the holy oil, consecrated by the bishop on Holy Thursday. And this was a guard against, because there were some pagan rites that they didn't use chrism exactly, but they did use oil, and sometimes it's hard to tell. I mean, chrism does have a distinct smell, but if they didn't have enough, anyway, so that's why they did it, to make sure that it was not that the sacraments that would not use oil that had been polluted by a pagan rite, that it was oil that was collected by the bishop and blessed by the bishop, and then dispatched out. And that's still the case. Parishes are only supposed to use the holy oils blessed by the bishop each year during Holy Week. Next, clergy, that is obvious, addressing a problem. Clergy were not allowed to carry weapons. Obviously not allowed to kill, or fight in battle. And the rule of St. Benedict was mandatory for all monasteries. Now, we saw in our previous episodes that there were Celtic missionaries, like St. Columban, who went to the continent to spread the gospel, and they did not have the rule of Benedict, because St. Patrick, who was a monk himself, St. Patrick, who evangelized Ireland, he predated Benedict. So, but they had their own monastic. But anyway, just to try, because the rule of St. Benedict is so clear, therefore useful, and easily verifiable, they're just, okay, now there's no choice, that all of them have to use the rule of Benedict. Now, that would not remain the case forever, but that's the decision at this point, because the rule had been proved successful. I mean, in fact, historically, it's been so successful that if you hear or know of a monastery that is not thriving, you don't even have to investigate. They're not following the rule. But if they are thriving, they are. It's one of those things. In the same year, 742, we find the last cooperative initiative of Carloman's tenure as mayor of the Palace of Austrasia, with his brother Pepin as mayor of the Palace of Neustria. And this had been a decade in the making. In 732, Charles Martel defeated Theudebald, who was the Oberst of Alemannia. Now, defeated him, but Theodobald managed to elude capture, so he lived to fight another day. Okay, Alemannia is Germany. It's on the German side of the Rhine River, and he in the accounts, in the annals, this guy Theodobald is given the title Dux, which was an imperial title, but that part of Germany had never been incorporated in the empire, and the Alemanni were not part of the empire. So I think that's just the Franks giving him a title that made sense to their readers. So he was the chief, and the Oberst is like a German term for a chief or a lord, a leader. So it is the Oberst. So Martel defeated him, but he lived to fight another day. When Martel died in 741, Theodobald returned to instigate an uprising against the hated Frankish occupation and domination. When Theodobald gathered sufficient warriors by the next year in 742, they crossed to the western side of the Rhine River to invade Alsace in France, in eastern France, which was at the time was in the Kingdom of Austrasia. Now that's Carlemagne's territory. It was Alsace then, as now for that matter, is a valuable agricultural region, very rich soil, fertile soil. And it had been, Alsace had been part of Alemannia since the Alemannians stole it from the Roman Empire in 405 AD. And the Romans had stolen it from the Celts in 58 BC during Caesar's Gallic Wars. And the Celts had been there since 1500 BC. Over the next 3 years, Carloman and Pepin waged war against Alemannia and Bavaria until the Adlingen surrendered. The Adlingen is the like the nobility, the tribal nobility, German tribal nobility. In 746, Carloman invited all of them, all the Adlingen, not the entirety of the tribes, just the Adlingen is the tribal nobility. I hate to say aristocracy because it's really anachronistic to use that term at this point, because these are bandits and thugs, but in the sense that they were, I don't even want to say elders because they weren't necessarily old. They were just the important people in the tribe, the Adlingen. Anyway, he invited them to a convocation to pledge fealty as vassals. So his cover story was, okay, we just finished this war. Some of you had actually betrayed your oaths that you gave to my father, Charles Martel, after the previous war. So, as a way to officially conclude it, you just come and pledge your fealty to me again. And remember that whole process of vassalage we covered in the feudalism section in the unit on St. Bede. So they did. In the course of the meeting, and this meeting is known to history as the Blood Court of Khanstadt. Khanstadt is a neighborhood. Now, today, it's a neighborhood in Stuttgart. So the Blood Court of Khanstadt, that's Cannstatt. So at the Blood Court, can you guess what's going to happen? It's shall we say they did not make it to dessert? Carloman ambushed and exterminated the Alemannian Adlingen, their nobility, their aristocracy. Just erased them. Thousands of them. The account says several thousand. So what does that mean? I don't know. 3,000, 4,000. Subsequently, Alemannia would be governed directly by the Franks. Theodobald, who started all this, had been joined in 742 in the Separatist War by the Duke of Bavaria, Odilo, Bavaria, southern Germany. Though Odilo had completely different reasons for doing this, a different context. On imperial maps, the old Roman maps, the province of Raetia, that's Raetia, encompassed the modern territory of eastern and central Switzerland, southern Germany, and the greater part of the Austrian Tyrol. So Switzerland, southern Germany, part of Austria. Southern Germany includes Bavaria. The northern border of Raetia during the early empire, like Augustus, Tiberius, the northern border was the Ister, the river Ister, which is now the Danube. After Trajan's conquest, a later emperor who reigned from 98 to 117 AD, he expanded the empire. After his conquest, the Limes Germanicus, that border with Germany, the southern, the northern border of the empire, but with the southern Germany, the border was moved 105 miles north of the Ister, north of the Danube River, into Germany. Raetia, this province, was linked to Italy through the Via Claudia Augusta. The capital of Raetia was Augusta Vindelicorum. That is present-day Augsburg, Germany, which is now the third largest city in Bavaria. After the empire fell, actually, I should show you Germany. This print's so small. Yeah, okay. So here's Germany, and here's Augsburg. All right, so this is southern Germany, and here's Austria and Switzerland, so southern Germany. And Augsburg was the Roman capital of the expanded Raetia, the Augusta Vindelicorum. After the empire fell, and all these tribes from outside the empire are coming in and carving it up, the Bajuvari tribe from present-day Bohemia, which is the present-day Czech Republic, invaded and settled in Raetia, the place I just showed you in the map. They're first mentioned by name in 488, and with their name being the Roman term for the men from Bohemia. The Merovingian Regnum Francorum listed them with the same designation in a list of vassals to the Kingdom of the Franks in the year 520 AD. They were listed as allies. The Bajuvari were listed as allies of the Franks. Intermarriage took place because, the feudalism structure among the Merovingian Franks with the Bajuvari, with the Lombards, whom we've met, the Scandinavian Langobards, who also came in as Federati, eventually settled in northern Italy. Intermarriage among those three over generations took place to create the Agilolfine dynasty of dukes of Bavaria, allied with the Merovingians and ruling. So their capital was not Augsburg, that was the old imperial capital. Their capital was Regensburg in Bavaria, which is over here. All right, so this is Regensburg. The founder of that dynasty and the first Merovingian appointed duke, was Garibald I. He sealed the alliance he's a Bajuvari, but he married a Merovingian princess named Waldrada in the year 556 AD. Garibald preferred to name his dynasty after an ancestor instead of after himself. So that was a convention, as we've seen, the name it after an ancestor. So his ancestor, Agilulf, whom Bavarian policy required all Bavari to believe that Agilulf fought heroically against Attila the Hun in the 450s. Moving forward in time, in 736 AD, a descendant of Garibald was Odilo, whom we've already mentioned. He became Dux of Bavaria. In terms of church history, Odilo was Catholic. He was not only believed himself, he also was supportive of the church and supportive specifically of the efforts of St. Boniface. Remember, I mentioned a list of dioceses that Boniface created in the new territory after he became papal legate. One of them was Regensburg, Odilo's capital. So Odilo, he had to allow that, so he was supportive. That took place in 739. However, so with all this background, why would Odilo join Theudebert after Martel died in making war on the Franks? Well, Odilo had a family issue. Odilo's mother was an Alemanni. She was not Merovingian, and she was not Bayavari. She was an Alemanni. So she's related to Theudebald's people. So that gave Odilo divided loyalties after Martel died. And when Theudebald was looking for allies, so Odilo gave in, to the temptation. When Theudebald invaded Austrasia, across the Rhine, to drive the Franks out of from the eastern side of the Rhine River, Odilo joined them. Since success would not only mean independence for him as ruler of the Bayavari, it would also mean freedom from Merovingian taxation. So he could, he had to collect double tax. He had to collect taxes for himself to support himself, but also collect taxes to send tribute to the Merovingians. So if he joined Theudebald, because if it was successful and they separated themselves from the Regnum Francorum, then he could keep all that tax money for himself. So this is the reason why Odilo turned against Carloman and Pepin, the sons of Charles Martel. So a very different motivation from Theudebald. This meant that, of course, he was defeated. Odilo was defeated along with the Alemanni, because the brothers, just ran in the blood. They were just better generals, just like their father was. He just, consistently out-generaled his opponents. But after they were defeated, because of the long association and the marriage alliances, apart from Odilo, his mother was Alemanni, but apart from that, they had multiple generations of intermarriage between the Bayavari and the Franks. So because of that, the brothers, Carloman and Pepin, allowed him to live, a courtesy not extended to Theudebald, and they sealed a new alliance by marrying their sister Hiltrude to Odilo. So she became the Duchess of Bavaria. And so the next generation of children, assuming they would have children, which they did, would be Bayavari and Frank instead of Bayavari and Alemanni. So this is why Odilo was spared slaughter at the blood court of Khanstatt in 746. 1 year after the blood court, bringing us to 747, Carloman retired from public life. He announced his decision to enter a monastery on August 15th of that year. And he did it all out. He went to Rome. He received tonsure from Pope Zacharias, then entered the Benedictine Abbey of Monte Cassino in Italy, which we covered earlier in the section in the unit on Gregory the Great. it was not the first abbey founded by Saint Benedict, but it was founded by Saint Benedict, and certainly by this period it was the largest of the Benedictine abbeys in Italy at the time. And he stayed there the rest of his. Carloman ended up being buried there at Monte Cassino when he died 7 years later. So that finishes the oldest son of Charles Martel of the Hammer. So now we rewind to Martel's death to catch up with the other son, Pepin the Shorthair, who's more important, historically, because he is the one who was going to end up ending the Merovingian dynasty and make himself Rex Francorum, king of the Franks, and the founder of the Carolingian dynasty. And Pepin the Shorthair is the father of Charlemagne, who would escalate by recreating or becoming the first Holy Roman Emperor. Okay, so rewinding. Charles Martel died October 22nd, 741, divided, and Pepin became mayor of the Palace of Neustria, which initially also included Burgundy, Provence, the capital at Metz. And it included Aquitaine, but they rebelled. I already covered that with Carloman, so I won't repeat it. In the same year, 741, for political reasons, Pepin put aside his German wife and married a Frankish woman who was the daughter of a Frankish a Frankish nobleman. Her name was Bertrada. She was the daughter of Caribert, the Count of Leon. They are known to have had 8 children, at least 3 of whom survived to adulthood. The most important of their children would be Charlemagne, of course, the first Holy Roman Emperor. So, he was born, his name was Charles, but Charles the Great, Charles Magnus, so that's how you get Charlemagne. He was born on April 2nd, 742. His younger brother also had the nick Carloman. This is Carloman the Younger. He was born in 751. A daughter named Gisela became a nun at a convent in Chelles, which is in France. Another son named Pepin died in infancy. And 2 more daughters, Rothes and Adelaide, both died, not as infants, but they died young. They didn't live to adulthood, and both were buried in Metz. We've already covered the joint operations Pepin undertook with his brother Carloman until the latter retired to the monastery of Monte Cassino in 747. At that point, Pepin became the sole mayor of the palace for the Regnum Francorum, for the whole kingdom. And so at that point, he added a title which his great-grandfather had first claimed, but it was not hereditary, the title of Dux et Princeps Francorum, Duke and Prince of the Franks. The year 741, Martel's death, was transitional in other areas of our story as well, with which we have to catch up. As the stories now of so Pepin's ending of the Merovingian dynasty and the founding of the Carolingians is going to catch us up, and so the different threads that we covered in different sections are going to now re-entwine, and so it'll become more like a single narrative for a while at least. So the story of Byzantium, the Eastern Empire, the papacy, the Lombards, all those are going to come back together. And even Islam is going to because the Muslims are going to attempt, and actually they do, Islam is going to invade Italy and set up an emirate in southern Italy. not in Pepin's lifetime, but during the Carolingian period. So, in the year 741, the Byzantine emperor died, and a new guy, so Constantine V, becomes Byzantine emperor. He was the son of the Byzantine emperor Leo III, who was the iconoclast, and Constantine V continued the policy of iconoclasm, which we covered in the unit on St. John Damascene, so I won't repeat that. Same year, 741, on November 28th, Pope St. Gregory III died. And now we've alluded to him earlier, so now we see him in his own context. Pope 91, Pope St. Zacharias. He was born in Italy. He was born in Calabria, which is the toe of Italy, southern Italy. But he was ethnically Greek. And so far, he was the last ethnically Greek pope. And he was the last to be fully bilingual and bicultural in Latin and Greek, in the sense that he was raised with both. He certainly wasn't the last pope to know both Latin and Greek, but he was like raised from childhood, knowing both. He was ordained a deacon by Pope St. Gregory III. He was an admirer of monastic asceticism. As a deacon, he translated the dialogues of Pope Gregory the Great from Latin into Greek. As pope, well, and before, but he was an iconodule, meaning he was one that defended the use of sacred images in worship, properly understood. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine V would prove to be an even more vicious persecutor of iconodules than his father had been. But as we, in the Damascene unit, remember that iconoclasm triggered revolts, all over the empire. And that included in the parts of Italy claimed by the Byzantines, which amounted to the Exarchate of Ravenna in northeastern Italy. And it was in that context that people on the lagoon, the Rialto lagoon, seceded from the Byzantine Empire and declared a republic. So Venice, the Republic of Venice. Pope Zacharias gave refuge to many refugee Greeks who fled the persecution because they were iconodules. And yet another schism. This is another schism between East and West that endured into the reign of future popes. This is significant in papal history, in part to support all these refugees, but also in part to promote recovery in Italy after the deprivation Italy suffered in all the countless wars that we covered and endured since the empire collapsed. Pope Zacharias developed the Patrimony of St. Peter in such a way as to lay the foundations for the later medieval papal state. Technically, the term Patrimony of St. Peter refers to any property owned by the Holy See. That's not necessarily limited to Rome or Italy. Historically, and you seminarians remember this from the first year course, but in 313 AD, Christianity became legal in the Roman Empire after 250 years of persecution. As a result of the friendship of the Emperor Constantine for the church, owing to his mother, St. Helena, because she was Christian. In 321, the Emperor Constantine granted to the church the right to own and transmit property as a corporation, essentially as a juridic person. To use modern, that may be anachronistic, but the Romans did have a concept of corporations where, They were entities, legal entities, and they could hold property that that endured even if the constituent members of the corporation died. So he just extended to the church that legal right in 321. And Constantine himself donated much property to the church, including St. John Lateran, which was and remains the cathedral of the Pope in his capacity as Bishop of Rome, and as well as St. Peter's Basilica, which is a shrine for the Universal Church, and others. These donations by Constantine formed the material nucleus of the Patrimony of St. Peter, which, as we've seen, had both positive and negative aspects. It did allow the church to have some influence on the state in terms of laws and governance and education, but with a negative corollary of church subordination to the state, and which at times included state interference in matters that really were theological and had nothing to do with the civil law. Because of the violent anarchy, the wars, the tribal invasions, the recurring plagues of the period with which we're familiar, much of the land, the Patrimony of St. Peter in Italy, had been neglected. To bring this abandoned land under cultivation once more, and to provide a safe living for many families, both Greek refugees as well as those in Italy who were refugees from the chaos and just had no place to go, Pope Zacharias carved the land into small plots centered around a chapel and settled families in the areas. In return for usufruct of the land was still owned by the church. I mean, it was still the Patrimony of St. Peter, but they had usufruct of it. The families would cultivate the land and pay some form of rent to the Holy See. Usually it would be paid in kind rather than currency, because it was a money-poor economy. So whatever they grew, if they grew wheat, or if they raised chickens, or whatever they did, then that would be that would be the rent. It was also understood that all households had to be armed and trained as a form of militia. Now, such groups could not wage real battles. They weren't going to go invade anything, but that wasn't the point. The point was that wandering bandits look for easy targets. So if they go to a village, looking to raid, and, they see a village with, 50 huts, and then a guy comes out of all 50 huts, 50 guys come out, and they're armed and waiting, chances are those bandits are going to go somewhere else. Now the guys in the huts, they're not going to leave the village and go chase them. So they're not actually an army, but more of a militia, so they could at least defend what they had. This action, this carving up of the land, which amounted to carving up the old Roman latifundia, the old estates, the old imperial. So it was yet another vestige of the old empire gone away, but this time not taken away by the barbarians, but by the Holy See. And then many of the Italian families resented this. Even if they weren't using the land and they didn't have people, enough workers or anything to do anything with the old latifundiae, they still resented it. Pope Zacharias' approach not only had the virtue of providing some form of safety from the rampaging gangs and feeding many people who otherwise would have starved, it also served as a template for the development of what would become the rural parishes of medieval Italy, and like the village parish. Okay, same year, 741. Pope Zacharias, again as part of his initiative, his reconstruction, moved the Holy See, the apparatus, the administrative apparatus of the Holy See, back to St. John Lateran, which is his cathedral, as Bishop of Rome. Why move it back? Well, 38 years earlier, Pope number 86, John VII, had abandoned the Lateran and relocated the Holy See away from that to the Palatine Hill, which is adjacent to the ancient Roman Forum, because it was elevated, therefore more defensible. The necessity of defense, military defense, as a consideration, is obvious in light of the chaos of the period we've talked about. So Pope Zacharias was taking a risk by moving the Holy See back to the Lateran, because the Lateran is not defensible. Militarily, it's not a defensible location. But he did it anyway. So his vision, he did not want to be afraid. And he did not want people coming to see the Pope to find him hiding on top of a fortified hill, which would just let them know that the Pope is afraid. His vision of the Holy See was that it must be first a religious force in order to heal the world, which was in desperate need of healing. Because he lived in a time of anarchy, he would be forced into the political arena more than his personal preference would have elected. But he never lost sight of that ideal of the papacy as intended by God to be a light of the gospel in a fallen world. The following year, 742, on April 2nd, Pepin the short hair had a son. Well, his wife had a son. And that is Charlemagne, the guy who would become, so his name Charles, later he would be Charles the Great, Carolus Magnus, and so that became allotted to Charlemagne. He was born on April 2nd, 742, the future first Holy Roman Emperor. Same year, 742, we catch up with the Langobards, who are later the Lombards. Okay, remember them. The Langobards were Scandinavian foederati, recruited by the Emperor Justinian I to assist him in reconquering Italy from the Ostrogoths. Recall, they betrayed the foederati. They betrayed him, and they followed the barbarian pattern of setting up their own kingdoms in Italy, and then warred among themselves to steal land from each other, just as they've stolen it from the Ostrogoths, as the Ostrogoths have stolen it from the Visigoths, as the Visigoths have stolen it from the old Imperials. And so the cycle continues. The Regnum Langobardum, the kingdom of the Lombards. And sometimes they refer to it as the Regnum Italicum, the kingdom of Italy, although they never did get all of Italy, so that's really not accurate. It's more accurate. The Regnum Langobardum is the more accurate kingdom of the Lombards. Consisted of semi-autonomous duchies, the dukes of which elected the Langobard Rex. They elected their king. The boundaries shifted of the kingdom of the Lombards, but the kingdom was bisected by the papal state. Actually, let's see. So Italy, is okay. So here's Italy. Oh God, right on the fold. Okay. So here's Italy. Shaped like a boot. All right. Here's the Alps up here, and you have Germany and Switzerland, Austria. So here's Austria, Switzerland. And then up here north off the map would be Germany. So here down here is all of Italy. And so here's Ravenna is in the northeast. Here's Venice. I'm talking about Venice up there in the northeast that's seceded. And here is Rome, the city of Rome. So the Lombards set up, they had Langobardia Major and Langobardia Minor. The largest, and the first, Langobardia Major was up here in the north. So you see, where is it? Oh. All right, Milan is up here. In the imperial period, this was Mediolanum, Milan. South of that, or sort of near that, is Pavia. That was ancient Roman Ticinum. That was the capital of the Regnum Langobardum, specifically Langobardum Major, the major, the large one. Here, and it went south. It included Milan, and the area around Milan is still called Lombardy after them. Tuscany to the south, which is where Florence is, Siena. And that went south until you get to the Papal State and the city of Rome, and the Papal State went from coast to coast. And then south of that, you have Spoleto and Benevento, which were, that's Langobardy, that's the minor, the lesser Lombard kingdoms. And the Lombards never did get down here into Naples, but they did have some, this area there. This state of affairs can be traced to the death of Theodoric the Ostrogoth in 526 AD. He was the man who unjustly executed Boethius based on a false accusation. At the time, the Langobards were roaming around pillaging in the fallen imperial province of Pannonia. Pannonia was basically next to Noricum. So it's further, it would be present-day Hungary, Slovenia, Hungary, and then around south of Bosnia, Herzegovina, that area. So the Lombards were around there. This is rampaging around there at the time Theodoric died. 2 years after, while the Langobards were in that area, an East German tribe, the Gepidai, moved into the region that's now Serbia and modern-day Belgrade, and settled there to pillage. In 528, 2 years after Theodoric's death, the Gepidai, under their Rex, who was named Cunimund, invaded northern Italy to cut a piece for himself. The Ostrogoths in Italy were officially a client kingdom of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines. So the Byzantines offered foederati status to the Langobards in Pannonia in exchange for them moving into Italy and dealing with the Gepidai. Tribal carnage ensued for a generation between the Gepidai and the Langobards, culminating with the Langobards successfully exterminating the Gepidai. That's why you don't run into Gepidai at the grocery, because there are none. That extermination was completed by 567. The Langobard Rex at the time was named Alboin, Alboin. He celebrated by having King Cunimund's skull repurposed as a royal drinking cup, and further celebrated by taking Cunimund's daughter, Rosamund, as his war bride, as his captured bride, spoils of war. And with her, he intended to have many sons. Alboin's reign, Rosamund, the Lady Rosamund, she had a different point of view on this, on his choice of utensils, as well as his desire for reproduction. The good Lady Rosamond differed. Therefore, Alboin's reign ended abruptly, facilitated by poison consumed from his repurposed cup. The Langobard kingdom then continued in this characteristic fashion, including their betrayal of the Byzantines during Justinian's Gothic War, already covered. Periodically, the tribal dukes would elect a rex, but that would be interspersed with periods where there was no monarch at all. But in either case, under the Langobards, the dukes were functionally autonomous, much more so than the Franks would allow. And okay, so that it went on like that. So now, fast forwarding, the Langobard, who was calling himself Rex, Langobardorum, at the time that Pope Zacharias became pope, was named Lutprand. Lutprand stole some papal territory in Campania, and Pope Zacharias knew it was only a matter of time before the Langobards moved in to pillage the city of Rome itself. So he took a risk. He did something, unbelievable. He took a small group of his most devoted servants. They went in procession in full liturgical garb to the stolen fortress nearest to Rome, which was at Terni. He knew Lutprand was staying there. And there, Pope Zacharias and his companions offered Mass right outside the wall. In full view of the fortress, within range of the archers. But just, set up and just did Mass in front of the wall. When Mass was done, the procession formed up again, with a cross, candles, acolytes, leading the Pope, not back to Rome, but toward the fortress, toward the gate. Lutprand could have easily murdered Zacharias at that moment, but Pope Zacharias had the measure of the Langobards. They were barbarians, but the cultural ethos of barbarians, at least these Scandinavian and Germanic barbarians, idealized courage above all other qualities in a man. So this act was not as suicidal as it might at first appear. For a small group to march unarmed to an enemy fortress demonstrated courage. By taking this action, the Pope allowed Lutprand to have kind of a victory in the eyes of his followers, because it presented him, he could say, he's more cunning than this Greek Pope, since he could leave the city with the spoils of war without having to actually fight for it. And there's nothing the Pope could do about it. So Lutprand allowed the small procession into the fortress, actually opened the gates. Because for him to fail in showing respect for the courage of Zacharias would cause him to lose face in front of his men. Just as if he had just killed Zacharias after showing this courage, he would have lost face in front of his men. So once they met, this got him in the door. But okay, then what is he going to do? So then Zacharias followed the precedent set by Pope Gregory the Great and simply paid him off. He essentially hired Lutprand by offering a regular payment to the Langobards, in return for which they would provide the following. First, they would evacuate the stolen territory in Campania, south of the city of Rome. Second, the Langobards would act as defenders of the Holy See against any other attackers. So this is essentially hiring them as foederati, and you know what's going to happen there. Third, agree to a 20-year truce and the endless fighting between the Lombards and the Italians, as we can start calling them that now, instead of continuing to call them the old Imperials. It's 3 centuries after the empire fell, so we start calling them Italians now. To cease, like a truce between the Lombards and the Italians in the Papal State. And it worked for, a time. But on the darker side, paying protection money, that's essentially what this is, did nothing to eliminate the problem of the criminal ethos of the Langobards. So the issue would continue to recur. The exchange amounted to bribery in our legal world, but must not be forgotten that there's no effective government. There's no 911 that he can call for help. There's no police he can call for help. There's no military he can call for help. There's certainly no judicial system. So he had to make the best of a bad situation. Necessity exists. 743. The Byzantine Greeks, as we've seen, were able to maintain bases in the ports of Italy, some of the ports in Italy, like Ravenna, because of their navy. And barbarians aren't into navies. This included the Exarchate of Ravenna, as well as in northeastern Italy, as well as Calabria, which is the toe of Italy. It also included the islands around Italy, Corsica, Sardinia, islands. So there's Corsica, where Napoleon was born, Sardinia. So this is where in the 19th century, when Italy was finally united again under a monarchy, the monarchy of the Sabaudias, they were the kings of Piedmont, Sardinia, and Savoy. So that came from that. And then Sicily, down here. So that because of the navy, the Byzantines were able to retain at least the ports, bases in the ports. The agreement that Pope Zacharias reached with the Langobard Rex, Lutpron, in 742, accomplished the Pope's immediate purpose of saving Rome and saving the people in the Papal State, but it did not, nor could it was not possible that it could have, brought peace to all of Italy so easily. Lutpron initially honored the agreement, but then he has a gang of thugs, and he's got to do something. They get bored. These people are not farmers, so they got to go fight. They got to do something. Well, if he agreed not to attack the Pope or the Papal State, well, there's the Exarchate of Ravenna. Let's go attack the Byzantines. At the time, the Byzantines were the enemy of the Pope because they were iconoclast heretics. So, beginning in 743, Lutpron led the Langobards into attacking the Greek bases in the Exarchate of Ravenna in northeastern Italy. Okay. In 749, after Lutpron died, the reigning Duke of Friuli, that was part of the Rex Langobardorum Major in northern Italy, was proclaimed, well, he was the Duke of Friuli, and he was proclaimed by the Adlingen of the Langobards. He was proclaimed Rex Langobardorum, king of the Lombards, with his capital at Pavia. His name was Aistulf, Aistulf. And he's significant. Remember him, as we're going to get to him. Well, maybe not this time, but we will. And just to align this with what we covered previously, in the same year, 749, is when St. John Damascene died. The following year, 750, history changed. Pepin the Shorthair mayor of the palace for the Regnum Francorum, the kingdom of the Franks, sent an embassy to Pope Zacharias. The embassy was led by Burchard, the Bishop of Würzburg, and Fulrad, who was the abbot of Saint-Denis in Paris, the same Saint-Denis we covered in the section of the Merovingians. We have a summary of what happened, recorded at the time in the Royal Annals. These are the Annals of Lorsch, Lorsch. Lorsch is it was an abbey, the Abbey of Saints Peter and Paul, which was about 6 miles east of Worms in Germany. So in the conquered territory, in other words. So the Annals of Lorsch describe it as follows. Anno 749, so the year 749. Burchard, Bishop of Würzburg, and Fulrad, priest and chaplain. At the time, he was just, later he would become the abbot of Saint-Denis. Were sent by Pepin to Pope Zacharias to ask his advice in regard to the kings who were then ruling in France, meaning the Merovingians, who had the title of king, but no real royal authority. The Pope replied by these ambassadors that it would be better that he who actually had the power should be called king. All right, let that sink in. So Pepin, the mayor of the palace, already in charge of the executive functions and the military functions, but serving the Merovingians as figurehead kings. So he's telling the Pope, okay, we have these kings that are ruling in France who had the title of king, but no real authority. The Pope replied that it would be better that he who actually had the power should be called king. This was the Pope legitimizing a coup d'etat. So Anno 750, in this year, Pepin was named King of the Franks, the Rex Francorum, with the sanction of the Pope. And in the city of Soissons, he was anointed with the holy oil by the hands of Boniface. See, he's in our story again. He's just one of those people that just shows up everywhere. And was raised to the throne after the custom of the Franks. But Childeric, this is Childeric III, the Merovingian king of the moment, who had the name of king, was shorn of his locks and sent into a monastery. Anno 753. In this year, Pope Stephen came to Pippin at Kiersey to urge him to defend the Roman Church from the attacks of the Lombards. Anno 754. And after Pope Stephen had received a promise from King Pepin that he would defend the Roman Church, he, Pope Stephen, anointed Pepin as king and his 2 sons, Carl and Carloman. That's Charlemagne and Carloman. Anointed him with the holy oil, and the Pope remained that winter in France. So this legitimized the deposition of the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, and the ending of the Merovingian dynasty, and replacing it with Pepin himself, who started the new dynasty, the Carolingians. Childeric was allowed to retire to an abbey, the Abbey of Saint-Bertin, it's a Benedictine abbey in Saint-Omer, that's in northern France. It's about 42 miles northwest of Lille in France. And he died there in 754. Meanwhile, Pepin the Short-Hair became the Rex Francorum, the king of the Franks, from 751 until his death on the 24th of September, 768. He ended the dynasty. We said that already. Okay. 751, Aistulf, the Rex Langobardum, the king of the Lombards in Italy, who had been waging war against the Byzantine Greeks, finally managed to capture the city of Ravenna from the Greeks and execute the governor appointed by the Byzantine emperor, the exarch. And that turned out to be the last Byzantine exarch of Ravenna. His name was Eutychius. The Langobards had already established, as we've seen, a successor kingdom in a portion of Italy with its capital at Pavia. With Aistulf's conquest of Ravenna, the Langobards gained strategic control of all of northern Italy, and then could once again turn a predatory gaze south toward the Papal State. This led to, which is mentioned in the Annals very briefly, 754. The Pope appealed to Pepin, the short hair, for help, basically a rescue from the Lombards. And we will stop there, because that is going to, Pepin's going to answer, he's going to respond favorably to the request, and that is going to change church history once again. So, for the moment, the Merovingians are gone, the Carolingians are here. We've seen evangelization all the way from the Netherlands, Luxembourg, at least western and southern Germany, and even into Austria. So we've made progress. Anyway, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.